one day it clicked in my brain as I started doing these burnout events called Cletus and Cars. I was like, man, if you think about it, it's just a little stadium. If it had a burnout pad in the middle, it'd be a little burnout stadium.
Mm-hmm. The world knows Cletus McFarland as the fearless king of horsepower, but few realize how close Garrett Mitchell came to losing everything. Nearly $1 million vanished into a crumbling racetrack. A fan was permanently injured during a burnout show, and federal agents appeared at his door. Behind the wild persona lay fear, pressure, and heartbreak. This video uncovers the emotional truth, how the Freedom Factory dream nearly destroyed him. From financial collapse and lawsuits to crashes, investigations, and the toll that ultimately shaped Garrett's redemption. The bet that broke him. When Garrett Mitchell first stepped onto the cracked pavement of the abandoned DeSoto Speedway in early 2020, he did not see the weeds, the broken fencing, or the rust slowly eating away at the forgotten oval. He saw a dream. He saw the birthplace of something bold, something loud, something that could change his life forever. To most people, the property looked like a ghost town that should have been bulldozed. To Garrett, it looked like a chance to create the Freedom Factory, a place where he could build wild machines, host massive shows, and film the kind of content no one else could. But dreams like this rarely come cheap. The price was a staggering $850,000, a number far bigger than anything he had ever taken on. Instead of walking away, he pushed everything he had onto the table. He drained savings accounts he had quietly built over a decade. He sold personal vehicles, tools, and equipment that had sentimental value. He opened new lines of credit and maxed out the ones he already had. This was not a calculated business deal. This was a raw gamble driven by faith, adrenaline, and a belief that if anyone could revive a dead racetrack, it was him. When he signed the contract, he smiled for the camera, acting like it was the greatest day of his life. But deep down, he knew he had crossed a line he could never uncross. What he did not know was that the world was about to shut down. Within weeks, the global pandemic hit with full force. The events he planned to host were suddenly illegal. The grandstands had to stay empty, and a track with no events has no income. It became a sinking ship. He had to somehow save it with his bare hands. That is not an exaggeration. Crew members often found him alone on the property, sleeping in the infield, hammering loose boards, trimming weeds, and editing videos inside a tiny trailer. There were no cheering crowds, no roaring burnout pits, no sponsors lining up to help. It was just Garrett, the decaying track, and a list of bills that grew longer every day. Property taxes demanded payment. Insurance fees for a facility of that size were brutal. Payroll for his small team had to be met, whether the videos performed well or not. Every morning, he woke up to a new expense he could not avoid. Every night, he went to sleep wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The man who proudly shouted about freedom was now trapped inside a debt that felt like a tightening chain. Little did he know that the financial pressure was only the first blow. Something far more frightening was already heading his way, and it carried the full weight of the federal government. IRS at the door. As the months passed, the pressure around Garrett Mitchell tightened until it felt like the walls of the Freedom Factory were closing in. The empty grandstands haunted him every time he walked the cracked pavement. Bills stacked up faster than he could shovel through them. Property taxes demanded payment. Insurance rates climbed, and the cost of simply keeping the lights on grew heavier by the week. What should have been the birth of a dream started to feel like the slow death of one. And then came the financial mistake that pushed him into true danger. One morning, after another long night of editing videos in a haze of exhaustion, Garrett received a call he would never forget. It was the Internal Revenue Service. His quarterly tax payment had bounced. He had overdrawn his account without realizing it. To anyone else, bouncing a check might seem like a simple bank issue, but when the check belongs to the federal government, the consequences are serious. The IRS does not shrug off mistakes. They investigate them. They respond with penalties, interest, and the threat of asset seizure. When Garrett heard the voice on the other end of the phone, his heart dropped. He later admitted that his hands shook as the agent explained what had happened. It was a moment that stripped away the Cletus personality and left only Garrett, the stressed and exhausted young man, trying to hold together a business on the verge of collapse. He had spent everything on the track, expecting to make it back through events, sponsorships, and content. Instead, he found himself staring at numbers that did not add up, watching money disappear before he even had time to earn it. Every new video felt like a desperate attempt to plug another hole in a sinking ship. And during this time, YouTube offered no relief. Advertisers pulled back as the pandemic spread, and the platform shifted toward softer, comforting videos instead of burnout clips and race cars. Revenue dropped so sharply that Garrett found himself working twice as hard for half the income. Some days he filmed all morning, fixed broken equipment all afternoon, and edited until sunrise just to keep up. Friends noticed the change in him. They described him as gaunt, worn down, and lost in his own head. He smoked more than usual. He second-guessed every decision. He stopped sleeping. Every missed payment felt like a countdown to disaster. Every letter from the IRS reminded him that one wrong step could cost him the Freedom Factory, his channel, and everything he had spent years building. It was a level of stress no camera ever captured. And as the financial storm grew darker, Garrett had no idea that something far more tragic was waiting for him at one of his first big events. But before he could catch his breath, a freak accident at one of his first comeback events would leave a fan scarred for life. The burnout. Pit disaster. The Freedom Factory was supposed to be Cletus's triumph, a place where smoke, engines, and chaos blended into a controlled spectacle. But the burnout pit, the arena meant to symbolize fan-fueled energy and unfiltered horsepower, instead became the stage for the darkest moment of his career. What began as a high-octane crowd-pleaser, a signature event designed to bring people together, spiraled into an accident that would haunt Garrett for years. It was fast, violent, and unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. And no matter how many times he replayed the footage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he should have seen it coming. On that blistering summer day, the pit was overflowing with energy. Fans pressed against safety rails, phones up, cheering as cars shredded tires into thick plumes of white smoke. The noise, the heat, the vibration in the stands, it all created a pressure cooker of adrenaline. Drivers pushed harder, faster, wilder. And Garrett encouraged it, believing everyone knew their limits. But the truth was, nobody really knew what the limits were. Not until someone crossed them. The smoke was so dense that visibility dropped to nearly zero. Spectators at the edge couldn't see where the cars were or even how close danger really lurked. A driver, blinded and overwhelmed, lost control of his car. Within seconds, the vehicle snapped sideways, hopped the concrete edge, and slammed into the barrier where fans had been leaning forward for a better view. Screaming, confusion, and chaos swallowed the pit. Garrett's heart stopped. For one terrifying moment, he thought he'd just watched a fan die. The aftermath was worse than the impact. A young fan collapsed, injuring his spine. Another suffered severe burns from flying debris and scalding tire fragments. Paramedics rushed in. The cheering crowd fell silent. Cameras that had been recording for fun captured the horror in detail. And when Garrett ran toward the scene, the pit felt less like a celebration and more like a crime scene he never meant to create. The lawsuit came quickly. The family of the burned fan accused Garrett of negligence, inadequate safety barriers, and failing to control the event. Lawyers demanded answers. Reporters smelled blood. The Freedom Factory's insurance company panicked. Fans who once idolized Cletus now questioned him publicly, flooding comment sections with anger, fear, and blame. But the worst part wasn't the lawsuit or the backlash. It was Garrett's guilt, raw, suffocating, and undeniable. He replayed the screams in his head every night, wondering whether his obsession with pushing the limits had finally gone too far. Yet even at his lowest, Garrett refused to run. Instead, he rebuilt the pit from the ground up, invested in top-tier safety systems, and met privately with the injured fan's family. Redemption wouldn't erase what happened, but it would define what came next. The disaster changed him, forever reshaping how he saw risk, responsibility, and the real cost of entertainment. And while he tried to protect others, he couldn't escape the danger himself. The next disaster would send him flying through the air at nearly 200 miles per hour. The crash that shook him. The crash didn't start with a mistake. It started with confidence. Cletus-level confidence. The kind that builds after hundreds of passes, thousands of launches, and years of believing you can muscle your way through anything with enough throttle. It was supposed to be another wild run for the fans. Another moment where Garrett Mitchell proved he could keep the car on the edge without crossing the line. But on that day, the line moved, and he didn't see it until it was too late. The car, a brutally powerful, borderline unpredictable monster, was already fighting him before the run began. Track temperature was rising, tires were temperamental, and the tune was more aggressive than he admitted to anyone. Garrett brushed off the signs. He had driven worse. He had fought through sketchier setups, and the crowd was eager. The cameras were rolling. That combination had always pushed him to deliver, even when his gut whispered caution. The moment he launched, something felt off. The rear tires bit too hard. The chassis twisted violently, and the steering wheel jerked in his hands. Instead of backing out, instinct told him to correct, pedal it, and keep going. It was the instinct of an entertainer, not a survivor. Within seconds, the car snapped sideways and rocketed toward the wall. The world turned into noise, wind, and helpless momentum as the vehicle lifted, slammed, and tumbled in a blur of shattered fiberglass and ripping metal. When the wreck finally stopped moving, the silence was terrifying. Smoke hissed from the engine bay. Fuel dripped. Debris rained down. Garrett's ears rang as if he were underwater. Pain shot through his ribs, back, and neck. He tried to breathe, but it felt like the air had been crushed out of his chest along with the front of the car. The cockpit cage, built for exactly this moment, was the only reason he wasn't dead. Rescue teams sprinted across the track. Fans watched in frozen horror. Some cried, some prayed. Others filmed because they didn't know what else to do. Inside the twisted wreck, Garrett thought about everything except racing. He thought about his family, his team, and whether this was the moment he had finally pushed too far. When crew's pride opened the door and helped him out, the reality hit. He was shaking uncontrollably. Not from pain, but from the realization that he'd come inches from a career-ending, life-ending impact. The crash wasn't just violent, it was humbling. Doctors ordered rest. Fans urged him to slow down. His team asked whether they should pause events at the Freedom Factory. But the biggest change came from Garrett himself. For the first time in years, he questioned the persona he had built, the fearless daredevil who laughed in the face of danger. The crash didn't end him, but it forced him to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. Even heroes break. And sometimes the most important skill isn't driving through chaos, it's knowing when to lift. Grounded by the FAA. The moment Garrett heard the knock on the door, he thought it was just another delivery or a fan dropping off something for the Freedom Factory staff. Instead, he opened it to find a pair of officials standing stone-faced, badges out, asking for him by name. It was the FAA, and they weren't there for a friendly chat or a casual check-in. They were there because of one video, one flight, one moment that went viral for all the wrong reasons. And in that moment, Garrett understood that the chaos he managed on the racetrack had officially followed him into the sky. It started with what looked like a harmless stunt. A small plane, a few cameras, and a short flight filmed for content. Garrett loved flying almost as much as he loved horsepower, and he approached aviation with the same excitement he brought to every high-adrenaline challenge. But flying isn't like racing. There's no improvising at 3,000 feet, no quick throttle corrections to save a mistake, no shrugging off a sketchy moment with a laugh. The FAA saw something in that footage, something they considered a violation, and they took it seriously enough to show up in person. The officials asked pointed questions. Who was flying? What instructions were given? Why was the maneuver performed so low? Did he understand the regulations he had supposedly ignored? Their tone made it clear they had already watched the footage dozens of times, slowing it down, analyzing every angle. This wasn't speculation. This was an investigation. Garrett felt cornered, not because he had meant to break any rules, but because the world he lived in, where every moment became content, clashed with the strict, unforgiving realm of aviation law. He tried to explain the context, the intention, the safety measures he believed were in place, but the officials weren't interested in intentions. They were interested in facts, documentation, and compliance. Days later, the letters arrived. Formal notices, possible penalties, threats of suspension. His pilot license, one of the few things that gave him peace outside the roar of engines, was at risk. And for the first time, he realized that the FAA had the power to silence him in a way no YouTube strike or monetization issue ever could. The grounding wasn't just a bureaucratic punishment, it was emotional. Flying had become a rare escape from the weight of running the Freedom Factory, managing his team, and carrying the expectations of millions of fans. Losing that freedom, even temporarily, hit him harder than he admitted publicly. But what mattered most was the wake-up call. Aviation demanded discipline, documentation, and humility. And as he reflected on the investigation, Garrett knew he had to choose between treating flying as entertainment or treating it with the seriousness it required. Little did he know, the real emotional reckoning, the one he had been avoiding for years, was waiting just around the corner. Yet, through all this pain and pressure, something unexpected happened. He found a purpose that would change the way the world saw him. Finding redemption in service. When everything around him felt like it was collapsing, the lawsuit, the crashes, the investigations, the overwhelming pressure, Garrett did something no one expected. Instead of chasing bigger stunts or louder victories, he stepped back and looked for a way to rebuild himself from the inside out. That turning point came quietly, almost accidentally, during a visit to a local veterans event. He went there intending to make an appearance, shake hands, take a few photos, and head home. But what he found instead were people who understood fear, loss, and responsibility on a level far deeper than anything he had faced. Listening to their stories, he realized how small his own chaos looked in comparison. These were men and women who had faced real danger, real sacrifice, and real consequences. Some had lost friends, some had lost their health. Others carried invisible battles that followed them long after their service ended. And yet, their strength wasn't loud or showy. It was humble, steady, and unwavering. Garrett felt something shift inside him. He didn't want to just entertain them. He wanted to serve them. That single afternoon grew into a mission. He started dedicating events at the Freedom Factory to veterans. He used his platform to raise awareness and support for military families. He hosted charity races, fundraisers, and tribute nights. And every time he handed over a check or shook the hand of someone who had given so much for others, he felt a piece of himself being rebuilt. Service wasn't a performance. It was healing. The turning point came during a private conversation with a veteran who had been struggling silently. The man told Garrett that his videos, simple racing clips filmed in the Florida sun, were sometimes the only thing that pulled him out of dark thoughts. Garrett wasn't prepared for that kind of honesty. It broke him open. He realized he wasn't just making content. He was giving people escape, hope, and community. For the first time in a long while, he felt purpose that didn't depend on views, money, or adrenaline. That purpose helped him slow down. It helped him rebuild trust with his team. It reminded him that the world was bigger than racetracks and engines. Service grounded him during the hardest months of recovery. It taught him humility during the FAA ordeal, and it helped him find strength after the crash that nearly ended everything. Service didn't erase the mistakes, the fear, or the damage, but it gave him a way forward, a way to redefine what it meant to be Cletus without losing the man behind the character. And as he stepped into that new role, he had no idea the emotional cost he had avoided for years was finally ready to demand answers. If you made it this far, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep uncovering the real stories behind the people you think you know. And when you finish this video, do not leave yet. Go watch the next video recommended on your screen. It dives even deeper into the hidden moments that shape the creators and personalities you follow every day.